Good afternoon. A warm welcome to this session under the theme of Art, Culture, Antiquities, and Heritage. I would like to welcome you to the event with the theme Culture and Biodiversity, applying traditional knowledge and practices to support the 30 by 30 biodiversity target. I'll be moderating the session. I'm Edna Kaptoyo, but I'd like to invite first our sister Jennifer Lassenberg to do the opening invocation.
Thank you, Edna. A very good afternoon, everyone. Normally, I would do my indigenous way of greeting all of you, but today I'll just do a simple one by a song, also to talk about biodiversity and why we should walk an extra step to understand each other and outside of our circle. Just a short song. You think you own whatever land you land on. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim. But I know every footsteps of the stranger has a life, has a spirit, has a name. Thank you, sister. I almost lost the words because I'm thinking of going back home where biodiversity is waiting for all of us to be discovered and to be respected. Thank you. Over to you, Edna.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for the inspirational opening, and I hope we'll have a good discussion. So I'd like to also highlight that the session is in hybrid mode. We do not have interpretation, but if you need, for instance, French interpretation, we have Aishatu Manu, who is bilingual, and you can sit close to her and she can try to summarize the session for you to support with the, yes, Sherry, with Aishatu. So she can support you a bit. Yeah. So welcome to the session. And this session is focusing on the biodiversity target 30 by 30, which is an ambitious goal really to protect the planet. So it envisions increasing the target by 30% by 2030 of the protected areas cover. And of course, this scaling up of protected areas for conservation efforts can bring opportunities. However, as well, it can bring challenges for indigenous peoples and local communities. And we know, according to indigenous peoples' culture, they use their culture and also traditional knowledge, and they have been stewarding lands and territories and protecting outside the protected areas for millennia, and also contributing to conservation efforts, however, despite facing challenges. And so we have amazing panelists lined up for you from North America, Asia, Latin America, and also from Africa, who are going to share their experiences. And we hope that with this event, they can be able to highlight some of the actions that they are using their culture to advance stewardship of these protected areas within their communities. They call it community conserved areas, so it could be their territories, and also highlight as well where they see opportunities or synergies in terms of what are their aspirations. Before we move to our panelists, I'd like to invite Andrew to also, from the Cultural Heritage Network, to also give his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Adna. My name is Andrew Potts, and it's my honor to be speaking with you today as the coordinator of the Climate Heritage Network. We're a co-sponsor of today's event. My mother is Judy, my father is Russell. I'm a gay white man from the United States with the privilege that brings along. Today's space is to platform indigenous voices, so I'm going to be very brief. The Climate Heritage Network is made up of arts, culture, and heritage institutions, public bodies, voices around the world who believe in the power of culture, from arts to heritage, to help people imagine, important word, imagine, and realize low-carbon, just, climate-resilient futures. And there is no way that is more important to that than through the cultures of indigenous peoples and local communities that stand in juxtaposition to the extractive take-make-waste culture that has given us climate change. And so we have an aim in the CHN of helping to platform those voices, but we know that culture is a part of the solution, but cultural institutions have also been a part of the problem. Through extractive approaches to culture, the wisdom, even the artifacts of the very communities that we ought to be allies with. And so we're committed to flipping that paradigm in the Climate Heritage Network. When we were given the privilege of programming 5 sessions on the cultural dimensions of resilience in this beautiful resilience hub, we knew we wanted to share that with Indigenous people's voices. And it was a blessing that we got to meet the International Indigenous Women's Forum, FIMI. Of all the science, the data, the information coming to this COP, I don't know of any that is more important than the voices and perspectives FIMI is bringing in terms of tackling climate change. And so I'm thrilled that on Biodiversity Day, we can have this session. And lastly, one final blessing, thank you, was that I got to meet my boss, Ms. Amanado Gambo. We've worked together for 6 months to plan this track. I have learned so much from Amanado, and now I'm thrilled to be able to learn from you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And also, I'd like to acknowledge Julie's Bicycle as well, who was the co-host of this event, together with FIMI and also the Cultural Heritage Network. So to start us off, I'd like to start off with amazing panelists from the different regions. Would you kindly share with us what are some of the cultural practices and actions within your community that really are relevant for the 30 by 30 target? You know, we are talking about conservation, increasing it by 30% globally by 2030. But I know as Indigenous peoples, you've been stewarding your ecosystem. So could you share with us a few of those practices and also highlight a few of the challenges as well you're facing in terms of stewardship of these areas? I'd start with you, Jenny.
Thank you, Edna. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'd just like to share with you a few principles of conservation or how we manage our natural resources in our indigenous areas. And I'd start with one concept we call tagal. Tagal in my community is called prohibition. Prohibition because we live by the river. So we basically zone our river with 3 types of zoning: the red zone, the orange zone or yellow zone, and the green zone. And this tagal concept is where we actually have specifically imagined that the red zone is where the fish breed. So it's a totally no-go for anybody in the community. And the yellow zone is sometimes, yes, there's a community protocol to say when we can harvest the fish and how we distribute the fish or the resources that come from the river. And the green zone is where it's open, it's okay for everybody to actually harvest the fish. Now, with this protocol, it also ties in with our culture called Gompi Guno. That means protect and use. If you don't protect, there's nothing to use. So we already have all these beautiful concepts in conservation, in basically to make sure that we have enough and we don't overfish, we don't overtake, that there's nothing left for the next generation. And that's why it is very important for us to recognize that the indigenous people have this type of governance system that exists so long, and that's why we are still there. we are still there to be able to resist the climate change and how, you know, the lack of resources in the community, because we keep replenishing before we take. So those are very good practices that has been, in fact, we managed to get our government to recognize the Tagal system, where it has now become an enactment in our state of Sabah. That's the northern part of the Borneo Island where I come from. And it's a very common to have it in the whole, in Malaysia specifically, in the indigenous territories. There's recognition by the government that this is such a good practice that it became an enactment. Then it's possible to do that. But of course, Edna, you talk about challenges and how the young people are taking this kind of traditional way of managing our resources. And of course, the young people will come to us and say, why are you still going and using all this old concept? And there's such a resistance from the young people. So we do need to go back to the ground. And this is what I'm working on at the moment, is on self-determination and also self-governance. We need to go back to our communities and relive or revitalize that core concept and core values of indigenous people. We can give all sorts of laws and policies, and in the end, people will not follow because it doesn't resonate with them. So it's very important now that we are going back to our communities and I guess I could say that our children are relearning the values. And it is very important because it can be applied to the forests, it can be applied to our rivers, it can be applied to any plants or living beings. So it's really important for us to understand the core values of the respect to nature, respect to multiple things that is being created for us, and let it live. So I think I end there by saying that we don't look at nature and biodiversity as something with, you know, a monetary value. It is something so deeply within us that we cannot tell people that how much that costs for us. It's priceless. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for starting us off with a really interesting governance system on how you're really stewarding the water ecosystem, which is really important because that forms part of the protected areas, especially marine inland waters, within the biodiversity process, and also the resilience with the practice, and also highlighting the importance of really the revitalizing of these practices and especially intergenerational learning. And in this COP, there's a lot of discussion as well on issues of intergenerational equity, and I think that's an important component of our communities. Coming back to you, Julia, I know you have the North American experience as well in terms, so what actions are you undertaking culturally to advance the 30 by 30 target, and what challenges really are you experiencing as a community?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I feel very honored to sit with my aunties and grandmas here. I'm from San Diego Pueblo. We're one of the 20 Pueblo nations in the state of New Mexico in the United States. We are in the arid Southwest, so we are desert people. And so our connection to water and land is very significant in our culture, and our people have been practicing water resource and land management practices since time immemorial. And a lot of that is actually embedded in our spiritual, traditional, and cultural practices, like dancing and praying and singing for rain, but also using different types of infrastructure to capture groundwater or to practice sustainable farming. My people have been farmers since they started to settle along our river, which is the Rio Grande. Many of our pueblos, stopped following buffalo herds at one point and started farming as a way to provide sustenance for the communities. And that's just a cultural practice that we still have to this day. But some of the challenges that we face because of impacts of colonialism and westward expansion is that a lot of our ancestral lands are now being managed through federal public land designations. So public lands as a tool for conservation has actually become more and more of a challenge for us to practice stewardship, reciprocity, and imply our value systems, much like you were talking about. And that's a shared common ideology that indigenous peoples across the globe have. Our morals and values really do lie deeply in our landscapes and our waters. And so with public land jurisdiction, a lot of our lands are now commodified for oil and gas extraction and other types of fossil fuel industries, extractive industries. We face a lot of that in our communities because we're such a resource-rich state. And so cultural practices like controlled burnings or the remediation and habitat restoration of natural ecosystems, and also even just environmental flows for our rivers, because there's a lot of water diversion happening because we're in the Southwest arid climate, and so water is a very scarce resource. We haven't been able to do that because of the federal government's implementation of public land conservation, and it also hinders our ability to imply a lot of our traditional knowledge, our traditional ecological knowledge for better and more sustainable land practices. It's also starting to perpetuate more of these Western concepts of land commodification. And so when we hear 30 by 30, we are totally in support of protecting biodiversity, because as many I'm sure have heard throughout this COP is indigenous peoples protect 80% of the world's biodiversity, and we don't, most of us don't do that through commodification. So these market mechanisms to reach goals like net zero or 30 by 30 is actually allowing for clean air to be traded on a global market. And that goes against our values as indigenous peoples. We don't believe in the commodification of the sacred, and that is, land, water, air, and the people. And ultimately, all of what we deem as sacred has become a part of this trade-off system. And we have to ensure that our tribes, our traditional ecological knowledge holders are also there at the table when it comes to protecting biodiversity, and sort of try to shift paradigms from Western conservation, because we are in climate crisis. The IPCC report has also stated that traditional ecological knowledge must be deemed as a science. Indigenous knowledge is Earth observation science, and so we should be ensuring that knowledge base is also implied into future conservation efforts. Ultimately, what we see as a solution for long-term goals is system changes, community stewardship. This concept of property and land ownership is also against our ideals, against commodification. We believe that land back is also a way for indigenous peoples to continue protecting not just the lands, reservation lands that we've been allocated, but our ancestral territories. So in my region, we have a sacred site called Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon, unfortunately, 90% of the federal lands around that area have been leased out for oil and gas. and that oil and federal fossil fuel leasing program has started to impact our sacred sites. We use our sites still to this day. They aren't abandoned. And so we look for better, full, holistic landscape management practices that includes all of these value systems that I've mentioned earlier. And so with that, I just want to also reiterate that our position as Indigenous peoples from the Pueblos is to protect biodiversity, but let's do it outside of a market-based system. Let's do it without commodifying clean air and trading it on a global market, because ultimately we can't depend on a system that created the crisis in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for touching on some of the aspirations that Indigenous people have from the different regions, and also sharing about your people. And coming back a few minutes to you, Jennifer, you didn't mention your affiliation. I know Saba and the Borneo is really a big region. If you could share a bit where your institution and also about the Saba and shortly.
Thank you, Edna. Yeah, I forgot to mention where I come from. I come from the island of Borneo, and Borneo is three countries in one, and I'm from the Malaysian side of Borneo. So if you want to locate it, it's just below the Philippines. And I am a Kadazan, the indigenous people there in the north of Borneo, and I'm actually working now as a national coordinator with the Indigenous Peoples Network of Malaysia. So I represent the Malaysia side, but JOS, the organization, is also part of AIPP, which is the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. It's a member organization. Thank you, Edna.
Thank you, Jennifer. Coming back to you, Lucy, I know you work a lot in Kenya, but also have experience working in Africa. And also, interestingly, Lucy and also Charsila also within the FIMI network, International Indigenous Women's Forum, and also the founders, and so have a wealth of experience. And so coming to you for Africa, you could also share your affiliation as well, and also highlight what are some of the actions that you've seen Indigenous women especially also undertaking in the stewardship of environment, and also advancing traditional knowledge as well within the biodiversity process, which you've been following for many years, and some of the challenges as well.
Thank you very much, Edna, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, as you said, I'm affiliated to FIMI, where I'm a vice president, and my president is sitting next to me here. So it's a privilege, and what Andrew was talking about is really great, because FIMI is part and parcel of the, this particular process, which we are proud of, to have new partners and to be able to work with you all. I'm also affiliated with the African Indigenous Women Organization, which is an organization that is also a member of the FIMI, and Indigenous Information Network, which is my original organization. That's the one I started as a broadcast journalist when I was young. So after working with many indigenous communities in African region, we decided to join together to be able to start African Indigenous Women, what Edna was referring to. I'm also affiliated and a founder member of the Indigenous Women and Biodiversity Network, because we thought that was also very important. And actually, Jennifer here, the sister, we were working with her, Jenny Lazenberg. We were working with her for many, many years, and I was surprised that the whole family, they are musicians, because they sing very well, all of them. And I'm also a co-chair of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, just to put a bit of more weight, not to praise myself, but a bit of more weight on why biodiversity is very critical to us. As a Maasai from Kenya and coming from the area where we work with mainly pastoralist communities, and at the same time, these pastoral communities, we are different in different ecosystems, and the area where I come from, we have some conservancies that are there, because the Maasai are also known for their conservation, and especially when you look at issues of protected areas, because most of them, their lands are mainly national parks, the conservation areas, protected areas, whatever name you may want to use. But these are the people, the communities, together with their fellow Samburu and some of the Rendile, where they protect the wildlife in the country, in the region, and also in Tanzania, because we cross over the borders. And for a long time, not really for a long time, but for decades, since the Maasai were there, they were living in the wild and they were living with the same wildlife. So to them, conservation is part and parcel, and is really something that they've been working with and have been involved for many, many years. And just like many other indigenous people, to us, conservation, nature is part of us. Anything that has life is part of us. We are all biodiversity, we are all related, and we should continue to make sure that at least what we have in nature belongs to us, and we should continue trying to look at how we can even save our own nature. And that's why natural-based solutions are very important for the communities, because they have done that for many years and so on. So when we come to the question of 30 by 30, for us, for especially the communities, Edna, as you ask about the communities in Africa and in the country, considering that we have also others in Southern Africa, the San people who have lived for many years in Kalahari, and they live with the animals, they are part and parcel of them, and they continue conserving and protecting those wild animals. The most important thing is that the only problem that makes everything complicated is when their role in conservation and protecting those lands is not recognized. Because the issue of land is a pain, is like a thorn. When you have a thorn on your leg, for those who live in those rural areas, it's something that you want to remove it because it's very painful to keep on carrying it. And that's the same thing when it comes to land issues, land tenure issues, because the indigenous communities move and they look at that land holistically, and they find it's their own land and they can be able to move to different areas. But when laws are set up, and then the government set the laws without the consultation or without discussing or without consulting the communities, then that is where the problem comes to be. And that's the biggest problem that we have in most of the different areas, not only in Africa, but in Asia and Latin America and so on. And that's what our sister was talking about how it's mining and so on. But I don't think even the community were consulted in terms of trying to see those resources there. Now, what happened if I give a specific example, in Masai Mara, where we work with 4 different conservancies, the community themselves decided, since we don't control this land and we don't have any say in terms of looking at the conservation or protected areas, we will donate our own land. And we'll have families setting their own lands to put them into one package. Every conservancy has its own members, they have their own package they have contributed. Others have maybe contributed 500 acres, 1,000 and so on, because they have quite big land. And that particular land is only for cattle and for wildlife. And actually, they even know what animals they have. They even track them. They know where the lions are, how many zebras are, how many giraffes are, and so on. So it's very important to look at that. And down at the other side of the valley, in the conservancy that I'm talking about, we have the Mara Triangle, which means the animals can move wherever they want without any disturbance. They have done that because they realize that if they don't donate their own land and have their own process of how to manage the land and how to manage their wildlife, then they will never achieve their goals, because they realize also that it's very difficult to depend on somebody else when it comes to issues of economic management in terms of looking at protected areas. And what we did ourselves as intervention is that we started working with them to see how they can do the management, and also to be able to make sure that they're inclusive. And we started doing bicultural protocols, which I think Jennifer mentioned. And with the bicultural protocols, they are able to identify their own, not only the wildlife, but also the plants, the medicinal plants that they have. Because within protected areas, it's not only wildlife. We have many more. We have medicinal plants. We have different plants which are significant to the communities. And we also have shrines. And we have, sacred places where the communities go. So with the bicultural protocols, then they are able to really identify their different issues and their different challenges that they have and how they can be able to, to manage them. So Edna, by them trying to sit down and doing those bicultural protocols, they have also realized that there are so many gaps that they have, and especially for the young people. Because the young people don't understand, they don't even know about those traditional medicine plants that we are talking about. Some of us, we are totally brought up with a traditional medicine. But if I give my daughter the traditional medicine today, they'll say, no, I can't take that. What's that, But we want them to know that these particular medicinal plants and wild fruits that we ate all throughout our lives in the forest while looking after the livestock. We have also the honey production. They have the bees they keep. There are different plants and so on. They can be able to learn them. And that is why it's very important to involve the young people. And I'm glad what Jennifer also brought up to talk about the young people learning different issues, especially on conservation. So this is what we do. But there's still a challenge because if the governments do not recognize the role of indigenous people, if the rights of indigenous people are not recognized and respected, then that's where the challenges are. In the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, we have been looking at 30 by 30 is the target 3 of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is being developed. And we hope that by December, when we go to the conference, to the 15th Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, this can be approved. And if this is going to go ahead, there's still a lot of work to be done. Our colleague was telling us, Jennifer Corpus, who has been following bit by bit in the negotiations, that by the time we left last month, the month of, I think, October, September, there were about 8,000 brackets in that particular document. But now it has been discussed, and you can see that it's gone down to 1,000 brackets, which is also a success in terms of looking at the progress. But what we are urging is that let people look at those, look at the framework and see how we can help each other to pass it, because that's where those targets are being discussed, especially 30 by 30, which has been controversial, because many indigenous people feel that the 30 by 30 will also be able to cause a lot of problems. There will be displacements. There will be people being, removed from their own lands. And when they are displaced, they go with they lose a lot, the traditional knowledge that we have, which is related to the areas where these communities are. And so there is a lot that we don't want to lose, but a lot that we want also to gain. So when we are looking at 30 by 30, there are so many aspects that we need to look at, and we need to make sure that the target is understood and that governments approve it, and make sure that the issue of rights of indigenous people is there. We are saying we are not opposing everything that is being like the target 30 by 30, but what we are saying, let the indigenous people's rights be respected, and let their lands also be respected. And if there is any issues that are going to be discussed, there have to be a free, prior, informed consent with the communities, because they have also their institutions, they have their traditional institutions, and they have the way they also converse and be able to discuss them. And that's the reason why we decided to have the biocultural protocols, so that they can be able to understand from the youth to the elders. They work together as a team. They understand, and they can be able to share this, and no one will give away their knowledge without consulting the elders. So this is the way we look at those things, and we hope that even after the post-2020 is approved, we still have the implementation process, which is even more difficult. And that's why indigenous people will never get tired. They will continue discussing and making sure that they send as much recommendation and work with different partners, because we also believe that partnership is very important. And even here, we are saying, when we are talking about finances and so on, we are saying let the finances also go direct to indigenous communities so that they can be able to manage the activities. Like the examples we have given here, and Tarsila will also give us, the activities the communities have put in place should be funded directly so that they can also be able to have mitigation and understand the issues that are supposed to happen, especially when we talk about 30 by 30 and protected area issues. So we really need to work together. And it's a high time the governments also try to understand and embrace our recommendations. But for me to end, Edna, is that action has to be now. Because we have been talking, we were in Glasgow, we said it, we were in different places we are talking, we want action. And so we want people who are here to listen and to also see how they can bring up those targets. Thank you.
Coming to you, Tarsila, from the Latin America region, I know you have some experiences as well, and also in your leadership capacity, if you could be able to share some of the practices linked to your traditional knowledge, even from your community, from Peru, and also what are some of the challenges? Do they resonate with what our other indigenous sisters have shared from North America, Africa, and also Asia?
Thank you very much to stay with us and listen. I will do my best in Spanglish. It's my official language internationally. I'm Quechua Chanca from Peru. I'm from the mountains. And when we talk about biodiversity, many times we have this question because not everybody knows about the richness of the biodiversity in indigenous territories. We have in South America and Latin America, as you know, all ecosystems, no? But here principally talk about the biodiversity in the Amazon, in the forest. But we need to see what happened in all ecosystems. In this case, I'm coming from the mountain and from the region of the potatoes. We have more than 4,000 different kinds of potatoes. It's our heritage from our civilization of South. And our ancestors developed principally the biodiversity based for food and nutrition and for medicine. How they know that this plant is good for one kind of disease? Somebody said about scientific. They were scientists, but in different way, not in the tube, but in reality, no? As you know, I think Asia and our region developed the, how do you say? The terraces. Yeah. It's engineering of architecture and hydraulic. That's why we think only to pay attention what we heritage from our past civilizations. Comparing with this system, more for me. Take one plant and put in the pharmacy. How much is the difference of cost? We need to think about that when we talk about biodiversity. In this case, we are talking what we will do until 30 in the concept of 30-30. I think the challenge is very hard for all, for indigenous peoples from the community, for new generation, but including for governors, because they are looking our richness on biodiversity to develop the industry in pharmacy. It's okay? and thinking about money. But what happened after? That's why it's very controversial to talk about conservation and protection of biodiversity if the governors or politicians don't think like us. It's necessary to be very clear about it, about this condition. With our new generation, it's the same. We know that new generation have to right to mobilize, because now we are not living in the ghetto. We have the right to exercise our national citizenship too. In this situation, we need to build the intergenerational communications. Like here, no? We are talking about what happened in our community and what happened in the global arena, where all of us are discussing about the impact of climate change, and biodiversity is the first, I think, aspect that we have to pay attention, principally thinking on health and nutrition. We, in my region, are trying to develop this bridge between intergenerational relationship and the national system of school. We took only one, the maize or corn. In one community, small community, we can, after harvest, we can find more than 100 different kind of maize or corn. More than 150 different kind of beans, frijolitos, and medicine plants. Our generation know the use of this, but the new generation no. That's why it's very important the context of the education system. We develop an experience with corn, trying to give the opportunity to participate in the, how do you say, la siembra, Taili siembra, planting. Yeah, planting the maize with my father-in. Okay. And with 7 years or 6 years children of the school, go use the instrument, small instrument, like in our culture. Try to do this collectively. We made a film and try to show if this is from other part or is from our community. And try to develop the guide for formal school, because we are trying to put this kind of knowledge as part of our curriculum in the school. Not only for indigenous area, including for national system of school. Because many times the people of the city eat corn, they don't know how it's produced. And we try to teach this and show to other regions to know that how difficult it is and why we need rain and healthy land, because the agroquímicos and synthetic fertilizantes with agrobusiness, that's a challenge for us. We resist, and we think that it's better to include in the national system this kind of knowledge, this kind of heritage, and how this heritage and practice is still actual not 500 years ago, now, and how it will be useful for next 500 and for all of us, because the hunger is a problem over the world. We have, I think, many things to say about biodiversity and the richness, but we think the principal responsibility of the governors is important to mention. Because in indigenous areas, as you know, we are not isolated. We have many people from other parts going to the community or trying to use the land. And the poverty, economic poverty, is the principal problem. Because many times, the system creates new necessities. For example, one girl or child or boy from community go to the school, they need materials for the school. They need shoes. From where? Nobody paid to fathers. And if they want to sell the corn or the maize, the price is minimum. But it's ecological, it's healthy, no? And it's a special variety. But the city don't give the same value to that. That's why we need to change many people's minds. Thank you, my teacher. We need to invest time on that, teaching and try to listen what is happening there, what is happening in the communities, and what is happening here. For example, in the COP in Montreal about the COP on biodiversity, how could we appropriate the information and to use this information to make advocacy in the local arena, or try to talk with governors about the impact of the exfoliation. In the 80s, we talk about ecocide, exfoliation of the forest, of communities, and now we need to retake that concepts after more than 40 years, no? But we are here, we have advances, we know that we need to relate biodiversity with cultural heritage, with economic development, right to participate in national policies, the right to be listened and to be included in all the process of the programs and plans in our country, from local to global. That's our role, that's our commitment, and we are here for that commitment. And thank you very much for listening and to stay with us, because the biodiversity, yes, we take care, it's in our territory, but it's useful for all of us, for all over the world, like food, no? Maybe sometime we can make a very cultural festival with all kind of biodiversity that is still in the communities, and we are the owners or are the possessors? I don't know. Because many times when we go to WIPO, the discussion is, this is in collective, no? In collective knowledge. It's not of indigenous? Yes, we are in your system. We need to defend our intellectual property about the development scientificamente of this kind of knowledge. As you can see, we need to use the same instrument and to discuss in the proper place of the system, where nobody from Western culture said, okay, you have my intellectual property. No, but they took our creations and iconos for free, no? That's why the implication as rights for about biodiversity is holistic too and integral and within multidimensional aspects. For me, that's important. But I think Lucy can answer something about what will happen in Montreal and if we have some hope or not in the negotiations, because biodiversity in this side, WIPO in this side, climate change in this side, when will be all of them together, including food discussion about food policy and health issues? As you can imagine, everything is related.
Thank you, Tarsila. I'm a positive thinker, so I do see hope ahead. But remember that in biodiversity, we discuss everything holistically. Inside there. If you look at the post-2020, everything is inside there. So don't worry, we'll manage.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, do we have anyone with a burning question or comment before we get some final words from our speakers?
Bonjour à tous, je vais parler en français, elle va m'aider à interpréter. Je suis Sherifa, je viens de la RDC, je suis autochtone de la RDC. Je suis dans une organisation qui travaille en partenariat avec FIMI. J'ai eu les formations hier qu'il y avait un événement ici, c'est pourquoi je suis venue participer. Tu peux interpréter, non?
She's called Sherifa. She's from DRC, from the indigenous communities of DRC, and she's happy to be here because she collaborates with FIMI and she was aware of this event, and it's a pleasure for her to be here.
Je suis vraiment émue des expériences qui sont partagées par nos sœurs. Ma question s'adresse spécifiquement à Madame Julia et à Maman Lucie. Parce que l'expérience que vous avez partagée, c'est presque la même expérience que nous vivons en RDC.
So my question is to Julia and Auntie Lucy. The experiences you shared are similar to what we face in DRC. And
en RDC, les filles et les femmes autochtones sont dépossédées de leurs droits fonciers. Ils n'ont pas d'espace. Comme vous avez dit que vous êtes dépossédés de vos droits fonciers par le gouvernement.
So in DRC, indigenous women and girls are deprived of their land rights. And tu as dit le gouvernement fait comment?
Comme elle a dit que leurs droits fonciers sont dépossédés par le gouvernement.
So their lands are also deprived from the government. The government is taking in their lands, and it's a big problem in DRC.
Ma question est celle-ci. Quelles sont les actions entreprises par les organisations autochtones de la place pour pouvoir reprendre ces espaces qui sont dépossédés, qui sont expropriés par le gouvernement? C'est juste en guise de partage d'expérience. Parce que nous vivons la même chose et nous aussi, nous nous battons de notre côté pour pouvoir reprendre les espaces qui sont expropriés.
So what are some of the actions or solutions taken to, ensure that the lands that have been taken by the government can be given back to the communities, especially in the case of DRC? Thank you very much.
Merci, Sherry. To finish us off, I'd like just I'll give a minute to each of the speakers you already highlighted the aspirations. You'll keep it short, we're running out of time.
Well, it's still on the issue of applying traditional knowledge. For me, the whole question of language. Because without language, I don't see how we can apply traditional knowledge. So For me, to all the speakers, what are we doing to protect and sustain our indigenous language? Looking at the fact that in most of our countries, it's mainstream languages that are taught in schools and being used, while our local indigenous languages are being left to die.
Thank you, Saro. I'd like now to ask each of the speakers for a minute each, just to say what is your call for action or recognition for the 30 by 30 target to be really achieved? What do you want to see? What is your aspiration? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. 1 minute. And I would just like to say that in Asia, rice, as in Latin America, corn is, maize is so important. Rice is biodiversity, diverse amount of rice we plant, and that represents the people, how diverse people, indigenous peoples are, not only Asia, but around the world. But one thing I really want to, my takeaway message is that please recognize the peoples, the indigenous peoples that represent or protect and keep, and you know, the biodiversity is within us. We are the ones who've been protecting and keeping that. We have plants and animals and different kind of medicinal plants that will heal the world. Don't, you know, don't separate indigenous peoples from nature in the context or in the name of conservation. Let us live in our territories. Let us protect how we have done that in many, many generations, and allow our children and their children to do the same. And we have been doing that. We have the knowledge to survive in our territories. We know how to survive in our areas, and I will make sure, because we live there, we don't want to destroy it. Yeah, we make sure that we have, the whole world have food to eat from the biodiversity, from the diverse food systems that we keep and the seeds that we protect, and make sure that it is going to be planted the next season and the season after. And on the question of language, document the practice of the indigenous people, not to document what is it, the tangible things. It's what we do. That's where the language comes in. For us, if we don't go to the rice field, we forget the language of the rice planting, and we forget the knowledge of the rice planting. So if we forget our language, we lose our knowledge. So in doing, in practicing, allow us to practice what we have been practicing. In that case, we have our knowledge, we have our language, and we can continue good things, the practices that we have done over since time immemorial. Thanks. That's for my comment, and I pass to my sister.
Thank you. To answer the questions, but also tie in final comment, we have to continue to fight against this idea that man has dominion over our Mother Earth. And a lot of these conservation and climate initiatives are top-down. We have to make sure that it's bottom-up, grassroots organizing, making sure that women also have a voice at the table. We have been impacted by patriarchy, and a lot of our traditional value systems are the matriarch. Returning to the matriarchy is also a part of language conservation and revitalization, land and water protection, and also just the protection of our cultural integrity in general. And that ultimately also ties into these efforts around land stewardship and reciprocity. Thank you.
Thank you. I think just to answer my sister from my younger daughter or older, from DRC, is that there is a lot that indigenous people are already doing, even from DRC, to really discuss issues of land and discussing with different partners. So the process is going on. And this is to also influence governments to stop taking land away from indigenous people. So the process is going on, and slowly by slowly will come to an agreement, or rather it will come to a stage where they will have to recognize. But also at the ground level, indigenous people, communities, the Bato, the Pygmies, all these people who are there, they have to unite and work together collectively to be able to succeed. On languages, yes, the languages are disappearing because of what, Saro, you have explained, and also it has partly been contributed by governments who have been assimilating some of the communities and leave their own language and their own cultures. But as much as we talked about earlier, the bicultural protocols are also contributing the fact that people are able to learn more and to have the inclusiveness of the young people so that they can learn their language. One other example is that when COVID was there, the last 2020 and 2021, there was a lot about tourism. I'm not saying tourism is bad, but the communities were left alone, and indigenous people, they're resilient people, and they were able to manage a lot of resources. We saw quite a number of wildlife coming back to the different community areas, and they managed because they found back to where they belong. They belong to the people, and the people were part and parcel of them. So what we want to say, my take is that let's take action and look at nature as we are part of it. And let's embrace what we have in nature. Everything, even the wild species that we have, let's have them as part of us, and we can be able to make a difference. And especially when we talk about climate, we can protect these things and avoid a lot of other complications that come from nowhere. Thank you.
We have the Senior for Indigenous Language. We have to try to use in better way this opportunity, no? The other thing is the slogan. I think it's necessary to be listened by governments that when they demark the protected area, it's not only trees, birds, or plants. We are inside these sites, and we want to be part of this conservation and protection, continuing our life there. Because now we can talk about the pulmón del mundo. Yeah. Because indigenous peoples take care about that. We are talking about biodiversity. We are talking the solution for nutrition because indigenous peoples develop and take care about that. We only want to be recognized what we gave to the world. I'm coming from the Americas, the region of maize and potatoes. Now they discover other indigenous products with high antioxidants. Now they are wrapping in very expensive cost. Please, we need to change the mind of exfoliation. Only that, as you listen, all of us want only the basic rights as indigenous peoples, to be there, to decide where we want to be, no? And continue developing our rights, our knowledge for us and for the world. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, our panelists. I think 1 hour session is never enough for this discussion, but you can continue talking with them. They are within this COP in Indigenous Peoples Pavilion. And to finish off, I'd like to thank you for sharing this session, and also to the organizers. We have our artist, Ewa Young, to close us off. You have like 3 minutes. If you're already here, you can join us and perform, yeah. So it's okay. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining. No? It's okay, it's okay.
Hey guys, hope you had a great panel. I'm AY. I did one song for each goal. And so I think for the first time I'm going to try out goal 15 on your way out of here. It's about life on land, you know? Hey, there's life on land. Hey, life on land. Hey, let's save the motherland. Let's save the motherland. Hey, 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 hey. Yeah. Hey, they call me Superman. I got the super plan. We're Project 17. I made one song for each goal, and I'm lining up like implementation partners and making change with music. And I'ma save our mother nature. I'll take the blame. Wildlife in the woods, burned by the flames, death by design. I'll take the blame for all the hurricanes and all the tsunami storms that ain't just going away. I think they need a superhero mixed in with an entertainer. Fame can make us superhuman, cause you gotta crucify me like, oh Lord. Cool on the surface, yet hungry and malnourished. What's up? We gotta protect our land, guys. No returning, so they call me Superman. I got the super plan to empower indigenous people. Hello. They call me Superman. I got the super plan, and I'ma save all Mother Nature for our favorite sin. Hey, our sisters, fam, I'll lead you to the promised land. Holy Moses, that's my name. Hey, hey, Lord, grab me by the hand. I'll lead you not astray. You guys good? How you guys doing? That's my name. I've never actually done goal 15. That's my name. The Bible says, seeking and you will find. I spent my whole life working for the man, but Uncle Sam can't buy off the motherland. Animals, the trees, we all fan. Anybody thinking other than is words in the wind. We got the upper hand, but we need action and a plan. Cough like secondhand, polluting the airwaves are hard places where we just seeking and you will find. I spent my whole life working for the man. Now I don't wanna spend a second doing damage on the motherland. Instead of damn for the habitat, we need a Superman with a plan. Oh goddamn, every man, lend a hand. We can power change for the motherland. Cause I'm a Superman for the motherland, and I'ma save our only mother, cause we'll never get another. I'm a Superman, I got a plan, and I'ma save our Mother Nature. Save our Mother Nature, baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's life on land, yeah. Life on land. Let's save the motherland. Let's save the motherland. There's life on land, yeah. Life on land, yeah. Let's save the motherland. Let's save the motherland. There's life on land. Hey, there's life on land, yeah. Let's save the motherland. Let's save the motherland, yeah. Motherland, life on land.